Okay. Well, thanks. I'm going to guess that most of you are dreading the year 2024, an election year with all of the fib-filled campaign ads and everybody pointing at each other and not saying anything relevant that you really want to hear. So there's a different way of voting that I think is something that we want to consider. It won't work for the 2024 election, but it could very well eliminate some of the negative aspects of campaigning, particularly because a candidate, I think, is going to want to be a little more polite, a little less argumentative, because there will be a value for them of being somebody's second choice. So here to tell us how that's going to work is Ron Zimmerman, who is involved with Rank My Vote, as you can see on the screen. So thank you, Ron, for coming.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm humbled, especially with the turnout you got here. This is a fantastic audience to get in front of, so appreciate it. Yeah, so I think as I said to some of the folks just a few minutes ago, how I like to do this is I try to keep the slide presentation to be pretty quick, get through the major points, and then based on your questions, go back to some of the slides and maybe dive in a little more detail where people want to hear about it versus trying to give too many detail and too many things. So if you can, as the presentation goes on, maybe note some things you'd like to ask about later, or even put it in the comments so we can remember it, then we'll come back and hit on some of those with the Q&A period, if that's okay. So yeah, want to talk first a little bit about who we are. This organization was started by about 8 or 10 of us post the gerrymandering victory in 2018. There was about 10 of us that got together and said, this is fantastic. How can we keep improving and reforming Michigan and being leaders across the country as a state on how do we make our democracy more responsive? We're a representative democracy, and we've kind of lost that connection where elected officials don't really respond to their electorate. They respond more to what the parties want them to or big donors want them to. And I think all of us and all 8 of us had come from different parts of the political spectrum. We don't usually talk politics because we don't agree on a lot of policies, but what we agree is the system has to be improved from plurality voting. It's a key pillar to just like getting rid of gerrymandering, getting people out to vote, making voting more easy, right? Getting money out of politics, right? There's 7 key pillars. Ranked choice voting is recognized as one of those pillars. It's going to help reform our democracy and make it stronger. So, we started as a C3. We're now a C4 since we're doing campaigns. We're a nonprofit to this day, although we're hoping to change that very soon. We have been going almost 4 years at 100% volunteer. So that's a true testament to the grassroots nature of our organization. It's also something that lately has been holding us back because we need more consistency. So we're working towards how can we fund, 1 or 2 people to make sure this organization every day drives forward in a consistent manner. Very nonpartisan. For those who, I don't know how many people here know of Voters Not Politicians or have ever volunteered for Voters Not Politicians. That's, a lot of us that came out of there very much believed in sort of their core values of being very nonpartisan, really focusing on reform. So we all have that sort of ingrained DNA in us to be very similar to that. Obviously our mission is really, it's Michigan only. It's to promote and implement and achieve the benefits of ranked choice voting as much as we possibly can, right? Ultimately, our goal, and right now that's for 2026, would be to pass this with a state ballot petition in 2026, just like we did in gerrymandering in 2018. Some of you who are more involved in politics may recognize some of these names, some might not, but Katie Fahey was the 26-year-old at the time who just had a baby, by the way. She was the 26-year-old that sort of started Voters Not Politicians, at least in a more It kind of existed before that in some fashion, but she's the one that really took it big time across Michigan, right? She's the one that most of the people in the organization just, gush over Katie. And Katie has truly been one of my, advocates, one of our, person that all of our leaders have always looked up to. She's been a great advisor. And we even have had Jimmy Lyons-Eddy, who used to be one of the leaders of ranked choice voting, Voters Not Politicians, but now, for those of you that know, she's now the lead, right? She took Nancy's position. She now leads Voters Not Politicians. And we've also had advisors from some of the big organizations, Fair Vote and Represent Us, across the country that we seek advice from, right? So what are you seeing elsewhere? And look at what we're doing and tell us where we should be doing better, right? And how can we best achieve our core values as a grassroots growing organization? So first, I want to make sure we understands that, like, we're not, we're very much in that sort of mold of Voters Not Politicians in terms of how we think about this. Now, how do I? Oh, there we go. So what I want to quick cover today is really want to cover not so much how ranked choice, the mechanics of it work. I can get to that in the Q&A if there's a lot of questions about that. But I think some people or most people generally know how it works to get a winner to 50% or more. So I really try to focus more on reviewing the benefits. Why do it, right? Why is this a pillar of reform that makes representatives more connected to their voters? Just talk about some good news stories, what our status is, how you can help, all that kind of stuff. So that's the focus of today. So, and these are things we used to talk about in much more detail 4 years ago when we first started presenting, but now people get it so much we don't really have to elaborate on it. We're dealing with a couple of things of why plurality fails us, right? And that is that, we have this almost psychological, it doesn't even physically exist. It's a psychological thing that, okay, I feel like every time I vote, I'm voting for the lesser of two evils. And a lot of that is because we only have two choices in so many elections anymore. It's only the R or the D. I mean, other third parties or independents are even disincentivized to run because there is such a disadvantage that we've almost lost having good qualified leaders running in our elections because they feel like they can't get past the two parties. And we have this strong feeling like, don't waste your vote. Part of the reason why we gotten down to two candidates is this feeling that we can't even let a third person into the conversation or into the election because they start to convey this feeling like you're going to waste your vote voting for that person, right? I don't think when I first started voting, I ever felt like that. I'm sure most of you didn't feel like that when you walked into the voting booth. You just voted for the person that you felt best represented your beliefs. And now we've almost gotten to the point where you can't even do that anymore because you're wasting your vote, right? I kind of think that's silly, but it is a strong psychology that's in our culture now. The other thing I'll talk about, I'm not going to cover it here because I dedicate some slides to this because the number one thing I want to talk about is how ranked choice voting addresses the dreaded split voting, the spoiler voting, this, what I was talking about, wasting your vote, right? That you're going to be the spoiler. Any of the third or fourth or fifth candidate in the race is some spoiler, right? And that can happen from someone's perspective, but this is what addresses it. And I'll talk about that a little more. There's also something that ranked choice has an impact on, and you don't do ranked choice as the primary incentive, but it makes sense. And that is that, getting money out of politics is the big way. That's the big bogey to get ultimately. But ranked choice does have an impact on that. Even though people might still spend a lot of money, we're not reducing the actual money spent, but it reduces the impact that money can have. When someone has to get to 50% to win an election, right? They can't just pander to a small, extreme, well-funded win with 23% year after year, right? This reduces the impact that money can have because even if they are well-funded, they still have to get 50% of the vote to win, right? So that's important. And it has an impact on disenfranchisement. It helps erode disenfranchisement a lot of groups feel, and the incentives that the two parties have now to just dig in and gridlock and get nothing accomplished. Not to mention a big one, and I think this was touched upon with Karen, right, is that one of the things that ranked choice does is it significantly reduces, if you just look at Maine, who's done it now for 6 full cycles going on 8, or 6 years going on 8 years, negative campaigning in Maine has almost gone away. And it's really gotten, when you're not sending out mailers 2 weeks before the election, just focusing on how bad your opponent is, you're still going to spend it on mailers, but you're going to spend it talking about, what do I believe in? What's important to me? How as a leader am I going to get that done? So not just what I believe in, but what the issue is and how I'm going to achieve it, and how I think what I'm going to do is better than my opponent to make that happen for Maine, right? So it's a lot more issue based and a lot less negativity, and we all can't wait for that to happen. I mean, I can't tell you how the first thing I see a mailer and all I see is a negative campaign thing. I can't stand it. Like, I don't even want to hear about it. I want to hear what you're going to do for us, not what, how you think the other person's the devil. So I do want to talk a little bit about the split voting, though, because this is really powerful, and I think everyone here will relate to this. Is plurality voting that we have today, right? Meaning 8 candidates can run, and the winner almost always gets 23, 28%. Way more people vote for someone else than votes for the winner. That's what we're trying to get rid of. And how that happens is, you would think, okay, so here's a community, right? 70% of the community feels like candidate purple. 30% feels like candidate red, right? You would think, what's the big deal? Who's going to, I mean, obviously, the person with 70% is going to win the election, right? Or the people that are voting for the person that is purple is a majority and will get their person elected, and not so fast. And that's because of split voting. So think about it. I mean, the history of our country, it's been like this, right? It's actually the reason why we originally got parties. when you see this, right? It's the reason why parties exist to begin with, is that, hey, that makes sense when there's 2 candidates. But think about it. If you're in a community that's majority purple, and when I say purple, I mean just either politically or racially or whatever, right? Whatever is the major demographics, right, of the community. It makes sense that more people are going to run in that race that feel like purple, right? Because that's the majority of the community feels purple. But the problem with plurality is, the second you start injecting candidates that are more like purple, the more you're breaking up the vote, the more you're breaking up the voting power of purple, right? So it's very easy for this to happen. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but when it happens, it's very disenfranchising for anybody. Disheartening, disenfranchising, whatever word you want to use. And you saw that in 2016 and there's a lot of examples here, so I don't mean to just, point this as the first one. But the one that always strikes me the most is the 2016 Republican primary, where there was 8 or 10 candidates running, and Trump won the first 20 states, every single state with less than 30% of the vote. Because all the moderate vote was split across 5, 6 candidates, Trump kept winning and winning and winning. One of the states with 19%. And in a winner-take-all situation, you get all the electorates, or all the votes go to the person that only was getting 19, 25, 26, 24, 28% over and over and over again. You can use the example of the last Democratic primary. You can use a lot of examples, right? You can use the Florida one that I'm sure a lot of people in this call remember, with the Gore and the hanging chads, right? You had Nader who got involved, and suddenly the majority winner didn't win because the vote was just a tiny bit split, but it was enough to not only lose Florida, but to lose the entire election, right? I mean, there's so many examples I can give. So this idea of spoiler is sort of crazy. Like, it's just, all these candidates should be able to run, right? I mean, that's what you want. If a good candidate exists in the community, you want them to run. If they're willing to lead and run, you want them to be up there for election. But then you're always worried, oh my God, you're going to spoil it. You're going to split the vote. You're going to let, the lesser of 2 evils win, right? But we shouldn't feel that way. And that's what ranked choice, the use of ranked choice, helps take this whole equation out of the conversation. And it's funny, one of the very first presentations we gave in Troy, Michigan, our presenter, Kevin Deegan Krause, who's just a great political science professor at Wayne State, he said, who do you think is the spoiler in this example? And this 10-year-old in the back stands up, raises his hand, and says, the system is the spoiler. It's not candidate A or B, or it's not one of the purple candidates that spoil this. It's the design of our current system that spoils this. not any candidate gets involved or whatever, right? I mean, we want more candidates running, but we just don't want to have plurality spoil it. And it's something that parties can manipulate. This injecting more candidates on the other side does nothing but help your chance of winning. That can be manipulated and has been manipulated for a century. So, and the example here, right? We don't have to go too much further than your back door for most of you in your area, right? Is that, look, I'm not saying Cherie will be a bad leader. I'm not saying he wouldn't represent all the demographics of his community, but for the first time in almost 50 years, there's not a Black person representing Detroit. That is 1% or 73, whatever, something like that, percent African American, right? Now, and the irony of this is all the other candidates were Black in District 13, right? So this is what ranked choice gets rid of and helps reduce, and I'm going to give more New York examples of this, but I think this is really powerful, that it helps this be avoided. That what is it? 72% of the people didn't vote for the winner. That's a really important thing that we're trying to address with ranked choice. And I think the New York example from 2 years ago will be even more powerful. But let me quickly just summarize the benefits, just because I could go into depth on all of these, but let me talk about this. The root of ranked choice, the secret sauce, is that ranked choice requires 50% or more to get elected. So think about that, just that core concept. That's why I want to pause on this slide to say, because the system of ranked choice requires that a winner get 50%, because you're ranking, and then in order to get someone to 50%, the lesser candidates, voters, their second and third votes come into play in who wins, right? Because that's the way this is designed, this drives what drives all the incentives and all the benefits. Let's talk about some of those. I'm going to mention this first, only because just like split voting, I'm going to talk about this the most in the presentation today, but I want to point out that split voting doesn't just split party or sort of partisan lines around politics or around, blue versus red. Plurality voting also splits and disenfranchises women, disenfranchises, just like we saw with District 13. I'm sure there's a lot of African Americans in Detroit that feel disenfranchised, that they had 8 candidates running and still couldn't win. 8 out of 9. And they still couldn't get a winner that they feel would best represent their positions and their needs. So I want to point that out, but I'm going to go back to that in more detail because I'm going to drive this one home, because this is powerful, not just for equitable representation, but just showing how ranked choice achieves something that plurality is very vulnerable at and is very, poor at, right? So let's cover a couple of things. Expands voter choice everywhere where ranked choice gets implemented, more candidates start running without exception. So when you now have a system, so think about it, if you're an independent or just look at libertarians or Green Party, their third party's been around for a long time. They're not even running candidates anymore because there's no one in those parties that why should I run? It's the lesser of two evils. I don't even have Green Party and libertarians voting for Green Party and libertarians anymore. They feel like they're wasting their vote. So why should I even run? I have no chance. I have whatever. When you start to, whether the election is partisan or not partisan, is party, a local one or a bigger one that's more partisan, you always see over time more candidates starting to run. They feel like their voice has more power. And the people that believe in them and believe in their beliefs, they feel like their voice has more power, because now I'm not just voting for one. I know that if my candidate gets eliminated from the process, my first choice, I know that my vote will transfer to my second choice. The voice of my vote stays in the process longer. That's very empowering. To know that even if the person I like most isn't going to win, I know that my vote is still deciding who does win. And that's a very empowering thing, right? So it can't hurt democracy to get more people voting, which we all agree with, right? How do we make it easier for people to vote? And it can't hurt also to get more candidates qualified, okay? No, you want qualified candidates, but it can't hurt to get more qualified candidates to get more voices into this. So it's not just the voice that they're trying to make you believe on the right, or the one voice they want you to be on the left. We need more voices in this to demonstrate leadership and demonstrate more perspectives. Rewards. So this gets to the sort of negative campaigning issue focus, which we covered just a little bit, right? Politicians who campaign and govern to reach beyond their base appeal to more people. Simple as that, right? So when that incentive changes, when any candidate enters a race and they know they can't just win with 25% or 23% of their base, they know they have to get 50% of the vote, it changes their whole approach. They have to campaign and appeal to a broader swath of the community, because if they're only one issue or whatever, they can't get beyond a certain level of support. So every candidate has to feel, okay, how do I broaden things that I believe in, the things that I will support, so that more people will vote for me? So wouldn't that be better if we had more people trying to, in races, trying to appeal to a much broader swath of the community in order to get elected? And the reason why I capitalize the "and" is the govern part. It's not just to get elected. If you're a little corrupt, you get elected, and you're a little corrupt, and you don't do the things you said you were going to do for a broad swath of the community, 50% is the higher bar to get reelected. So if you're not doing the things, if you're not as honest and whatever as you should be, so much easier to get rid of your butt. There are so many communities now that feel like, yeah, the person's got a strong base, they keep getting 30%, they keep winning. And ranked choice helps give those people more power to get rid of people who aren't doing what they said they would do for their community. It's the right incentives. And that's what we're trying to do with ranked choice. One of the number one things, change the incentives. Like in business, we always say, there's that mantra that if you want change in your business, change your goal, right? If you change your goals and your incentives, you'll get better outcomes. You'll get different outcomes, right? Hopefully better, but different. Same thing here. Change the incentive, change the system and the incentive. The behaviors will change. The behaviors of the candidate, the behaviors of the party, it will all start to change. Get rid of gerrymandering, more people voting, ranked choice voting. That changes, all those things together change behaviors. Less polarization, right? So the more that you're getting candidates elected that are more connected to making sure they're delivering benefits for their representatives or their voter base, the more they're less extreme. I know that sounds weird, or they're just less extreme. They compromise more, right? Because they want their voters to feel like they're getting something done. They're not entrenched in a position, gridlock, getting nothing done. Voters don't want that. Voters want to see that you're accomplishing something, even if that means at times you have to compromise a little bit. At least you're making progress. But when you're gridlocked, you're not making any progress either way, right? More results. And then finally, I think some other ones that depending on the community have an impact. I talked a little bit about the reduction of, the impact of special interests, right? And money and lobbyists and wealthy donors and so on. That money might still be there, but the impact that it has on the election is lessened. Saves money. Not as much of an issue in Michigan, but think about Georgia. If Georgia did ranked choice voting, dear God, every cycle they're bringing the entire electorate back, which by the way is a farce because they don't all come back to vote in the runoff, right? So it's always a reduced number that votes a second time. So that saves money. I mean, it costs Georgia, what, $3 million, I think, every time they have to do a runoff. It's another $3 million they have to spend. Plus the parties spend, Googles of more money in 3 weeks just to do a runoff. Silly. Just use ranked choice. You automatically get a majority winner. All this runoff stuff goes away. Now, we don't have as much of that in Michigan. Like Lansing and a couple other cities still have runoffs to reduce the candidates down for the general election. But generally speaking, it's not as big of an issue here in Michigan. And then the last thing, and this is sort of minor, but the more you think about it, it actually has an effect, is in ranked choice voting where it's used, winners are more accepted. I mean, think about it. Even a ranked choice election, your candidates, your favorite candidates, or one or two, aren't always going to win. There's still going to be winners and losers. But at least, look, if my candidate lost, at least I know I lost to the person that got the majority of the vote. Right? So anyway, it increases turnout, reduces disenfranchisement. You get more quality candidates. Those are just all things that voters like. More turnout, quality candidates, more voters determining the outcome and the winner of the election. Majority is more democratic than a plurality. Simple as that. Voters just love that concept. So let me talk about New York City really quickly, because I want to drive this split voting home, and this concern that people have had in theory for a decade before ranked choice started taking off, about how it's too complicated, turnout would go down. The truth is that's all BS. All that is proving out not to be the case. So let's just look at what happened in New York City. They implemented for the first time in 2021. So if you look at the graph, that's probably all you have to even look at to kind of drive the point home, right? Second highest turnout in New York City history. This new ranked choice thing that everyone's going to be confused and no one's going to understand it. And it's, I mean, they spent money on education. They definitely spent the first cycle or two. You got to spend more money on education, making sure people are comfortable. They understand how it works. I mean, I'm not saying that you don't need to do that. You absolutely need to do that. But if you do it, people sort of realize, wow, I like this 50% winner. Yeah, I'll give it a shot. And they walk out of the poll place and they say, that was actually pretty easy. So now I don't want to claim that ranked choice doubled, in 2017 to 21. I'm not going to say ranked choice was all because of ranked choice. And the reason why I say that is that the New York mayor was an incumbent in 2017, right? Versus he was term limited in 2021, right? So it was an open field in 2021. So that drove a big part of that doubling of the turnout, right? But still, my point is that ranked choice played a part in that. It wasn't scary. People all still turned out, second biggest in New York history and second biggest since almost 40 years in that chart, right? So it all doubled. And, just as an example, the Hispanic community, it almost tripled. Like their biggest turnout ever by far. A minor point, but I think for all of those who work elections and are clerks and or whatever, are probably more impressed by this, because after you just saw doubled on the left side, maybe 5% doesn't sound like much, but they had a 5% increase, which, if you know all the data across the country on like how down ballot changes over time, like 5% is astounding. To have an election where from one election to another, the down ballot voting went up 5%, that is unheard of. So that was another little small added benefit for turnout. Like, so you had many more voters now voting, not just because, how a lot of voters, not a lot, but there are some voters just go in and just the two offices they care about, and they vote and they hand it in. And now you have, you're seeing this trend they had, it had already gone up the year before or the cycle before, but it went up even more with ranked choice voting. So that's just another good indication that it didn't scare anybody. It didn't, wasn't too confusing. So, and the point I make with this slide, and we can spare on this, but the point is that these cities that implemented, it's nothing but up. Even cities that have been going down went up. Cities that were going up kept going up. I mean, the data is all there that there aren't any that go down because they're scared of ranked choice voting. Big thing I want to talk about, especially with this group. And I don't want you to think that I inserted this slide because of the group I'm speaking to. This is part of the base presentation I give every single time. But the equitable representation. So, okay, again, the graphic tells you all you need to know. But let me put that more into words. So in New York City, there's 5 boroughs, each have 10 council people, plus the overall mayor. That's 51 positions. Been like that for almost 100 years in New York City. That's 51 leadership positions. In the history of New York City, the most percentage-wise women ever had, at the absolute high watermark, was 35% of those positions. In fact, if you look at the graph, the last two had actually been going down. It was 35% and had gone down more, to in the 20s. It didn't take one cycle, 2 or 3 or 4 cycles of ranked choice. The very first cycle, women now have 52% of the seats in New York City. That is an unbelievable jump in one cycle. And there's nothing about ranked choice that favors women or favors a Black person or favors any other demographic. the reason why this happens, but the number one reason, part of it has to do with, you know, the recent sort of Me Too and more women feel comfortable running. I mean, there were more candidates running. So a part of it goes into just more women running. But the overwhelming impact of that, and I think the AG, the Democratic AG from, I can, maybe I'll try to include the video from her speaking to this post-election, how ranked choice had an incredible impact on the ability of women to now win. But the reason this happens is there's 50 wards in New York City. Historically, all it would take is 2 women to run in any one ward, and they would split that demographic. Not the women all vote for women, or that, you know, it's the overwhelming demographic that determines elections, but it is a pretty big voting block. So anytime 2 women run, it would split the vote, and neither of them would ever win. So now with ranked choice, you have the choice now not to pick just one. Oh, I like them both, but I got to pick one. Now you can say, okay, yeah, I like this one a little bit better. I like this woman better. If you're a woman voter, I like this woman voter better, but I can pick the second woman that is very close to my favorite as well as second. So you're not splitting that vote. So you don't have 2 women running, splitting the vote, where most of the time neither of them win. Now they did win. Now that voting block power was not split, and your vote went to the second, so you had more women winning some of these elections that before were just split. Very powerful. And it's not just based on gender. So let's look at what the other amazing thing in New York City. Again, one cycle, one ranked choice election. So the way they kind of, and I stole this from one of the presentations that came out of the New York City election. They said, well, look at, here's how the current city council looks, and here's how the incoming city council looks. Okay. So yes, it looks like it's more diverse just from the numbers, but to me, that wasn't the powerful thing about the power of ranked choice voting. It's this. It's that, look at the bubble on the right, or sorry, look at the bubble on the incoming city council. Sorry, the bubble, when I say on the right, and I don't know if you can see my mouse, but look at the bubble in the middle. So this is now the incoming New York City City Council. Again, this is as of 2021. This was the incoming city council makeup. This is a representation of the voting demographics racially of New York City. You almost can't tell the difference. For the first time in New York City, the makeup of city council looks very close to the makeup of the electorate. And for the history of New York City, it's always looked more like this or worse than this. A lot of white male, right? So for the first time now, and again, so think about it as we just presented it from a women perspective, think about it from a racial perspective, and the reason, because this is what you're seeing here is the reason why New York did ranked choice voting. There were a lot of communities feeling disenfranchised. You have a Hispanic community, 48% Hispanic. That's the minority demographic in that ward. All it took was 2 Hispanics to run, because you're going to get a lot of Hispanics running in a Hispanic community, right? All it takes is 2 or 3 of them to run. They split the vote, and they 3 out of 4 times they couldn't get a Hispanic to win in even a majority Hispanic community. That's very disenfranchising to those demographics, right? Just like you saw with Detroit. It wasn't 1 or 2 in the community running. It was 8, and they still couldn't win. Right. So this is why New York City did it, and it delivered right out of the gate. You weren't splitting votes of Hispanics and Hispanic communities. You weren't splitting vote of Black candidates and the Black demographics in primarily Black communities. So this had an amazing impact on New York City, and doesn't get sold enough. I think there's a lot of emphasis on Adams, who won. A lot of people don't like Adams as the mayor of New York City. So, and he maybe hasn't done a great job so far leading the city, which gives a lot of criticism. That overshadows these outcomes. Women went from 28% to 52% from one election to the next. For the first time, New York City demographics of the leaders of the city now look like racially the leaders that are in city, the makeup of the population, right? That's one of the equitable representation of powers of ranked choice voting. It's one of the number one reasons Ann Arbor passed it the same year with 72%, 73% of the vote. We passed in Ann Arbor with 73%. And this is one of the major reasons they wanted to do it. They wanted equitable representation, both gender, both racial, but also, they're always Democrat. They're always going to be progressive. They want to make sure that the progressive that gets elected in Ann Arbor is the type of progressive that represents the majority of their community. So that's one of the reasons they did it. They didn't want to see 2-3 wards every single cycle with someone winning with less than 50%, because that questions whether they're really the right progressive that truly represents, the progressive nature of the majority of the city. It's all about reducing split voting. Not to mention, hey, user satisfaction, customer satisfaction. Isn't that one of the biggest measures of any organization, right? Very first ranked choice election, the user satisfaction was 77%. That doesn't sound high. Anything historically over 70 was really, really good on exit polls of anything. Did you like the election? Do you like the choice of your candidates, whatever? The first ranked choice election, where they thought it would be confusing, they'd be frustrated that this new system gave them a bad outcome, they all left the polls saying 77%. Not to mention the fact that New York saved $10 million from doing a runoff. So real quickly, maybe that wasn't real quick. Where am I at here? Maybe that wasn't real fast. Sorry about that. So, but I'll cover these sections really, really quickly. Our goal: implement ranked choice in Michigan. Obviously we're sort of beginning with the end in mind, which is we want to get to a 2026 statewide constitutional ballot initiative. But before that, right, as we work up towards that, we want to pass about 8 to 10 cities. So that's our strategy, right? And it's valid. Like, some people have said ranked choice isn't illegal. Maybe even the Bureau of Elections, some of the officials have said that. It's been used in Ann Arbor once, was completely constitutional, legal. There's nothing that's illegal about ranked choice in the state of Michigan. And our progress is, we passed Ferndale and Ann Arbor. I don't take credit for Ferndale. That was a little while ago. We do have campaigns now, and this, looks like I pulled up my older version of this presentation. Sorry about that. But we actually tried to get it on the ballot this year on 5 cities, knowing that we wouldn't probably get them all. And we did get Kalamazoo, East Lansing, and Royal Oak. And we have a number of cities, Lansing's, we're going to keep going with Lansing, even though we didn't get it on. We're going to keep that going. We got Traverse City already said we're ready to go the next cycle. We're looking at Dearborn. We're looking at Warren. We're looking at a lot of these cities in Detroit, out west, Grand Rapids, Holland. We're looking at a lot of cities where, especially the Detroit area, where they have a lot of less than 50% winners. So Dearborn, Warren, Inkster, these are places we're going to start looking at for the next cycle, because there's a really great case for them to implement ranked choice. And that's it. I won't get into all this because I'll sell this more in the email follow-up, but that's sort of, in the email follow-up, I'll give you all kinds of links. We could really use your help with either volunteering or donating or whatever, because, we're a very small group and, 3 campaigns we have to fund. So, so with that, any questions? If you can open up the muting, any questions that people have? Don't be shy.
I have a question.
Sure. Is it Marcia?
It's Marcia. Yes.
Hi, Marcia.
Hi. This was very interesting. I can see all the advantages, and we certainly need to get rid of the extremes that we have in our elections. So I think that's one of the biggest ones right now that we're suffering from. But what I want to know is, how many votes do you offer? I mean, would you have if you went to the polls? Is it 2 or 3, and why? Can you answer that?
Correct. So there's a statistical model that determines, based on the number of candidates, what is the recommended, suggestion you should make to voters to rank. So usually it's not like, and by the way, you don't even have to rank. It's not required. Like, if you just still want to pick one, you can still just pick one. If the recommendation is to, rank 5, you can rank 3, you can rank 5, you can rank 7. If there's 7 total candidates, but it's saying rank 5, you could still rank 7. But there's a statistical model that says mathematically, what is the number of ranks that we want to ensure that we get, I mean, you're going to get 50%, but it just helps ensure that you get good outcomes, especially when, like, all 3 of these cities, we're not doing it just for the mayor. We're also doing it for city council, where it's pick 3. It's a 3 winner. So that's where it is important to incentivize the voters to rank as many as you can to make sure that you get 3 candidates over the threshold.
Okay. Interesting.
There's no one answer. It really is dependent about how many candidates are running is kind of my answer.
I have a question, Mary Bujea, and I'm going to speak from the, is it okay to talk?
Sure.
Sure.
That's not my dog.
Oh, good.
I'm going to speak from the experience of a candidate, because years ago I was in the school board in Dearborn, and I ran for 3 times in one. And on the school board, your expenses are minimal compared to what you have to do for a state election or a federal election. And I'm wondering about the fairness of, if a candidate's, spends $1 million and then the second or third place choice wins. I'm really wondering where the fairness is as far as the people who have invested that kind of time, energy, and money.
I guess the way I'll answer your question is, I'm not sure why we'd be prefacing that conversation based on money. No offense, but I would think that the way you primarily should be looking at this is that regardless of money, right, you would want fair or not fair, because I think the fairest is, in my opinion, I would think the fairest is who has the best case, who has demonstrated good leadership and gets the majority of the vote of the community. Not like, okay, somebody spent $1 million and still didn't win. Well, if they still didn't win and had $1 million to spend, then there was something way wrong. I mean, there was something that a lot of people didn't like, either because they had that much money to spend and they were trying to buy it, or there was just whatever their stances were that they wanted to do for the community just didn't ring true, to a majority, right? So, sorry, I didn't mean to be sort of combative there with that. I just wanted to kind of point out that money shouldn't be the factor that we're looking at. We want to make sure the winner has the majority of the community support.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Mary.
I agree with the people that say that the elections have become too negative and rather than issues, and I prefer issues.
Right.
But I am wondering, how you can level that. That, because I was talking to some of my friends about it, and I said, okay, if candidate A is your first choice and candidate second is, oh, okay, and no problem. And then it turns out that the okay candidate wins instead of the best candidate. So
That's not well.
Yeah, well, I think by definition, and I don't know how we define best. Best is a qualitative term.
yeah.
But if best is anything other than who got the majority of the votes, that got the majority of the community support, I'm happy to have that debate. Like, if you come up with any other definition of what's best. Now, remember, and I want to be clear about this, ranked choice doesn't get rid of money in politics. Like, our goal isn't to change anything, law or anything that's going to get rid of money in politics. Even in ranked choice, the person with more money probably has a bit of an advantage, especially if they have a lot more money. All ranked choice does, all I'm saying about ranked choice is it just helps, because the person still has to get 50%, it just slightly mitigates the impact of the money in the election. Right. Because
I can understand working in primaries, but in the actual election, can you switch over parties? Like, you want one party A, yes, and second or third choice, you want party B?
You raise a great question about when this is done in a partisan race, like for governor or for, your state rep or something. Yeah, I mean,
Have to split your vote.
One of the number one or the biggest strategic decision we still have to make, and we need more data about this and more, is how are we going to use if we implement ranked choice? What are we going to do with the primaries? Right. So I think until we get more data, I think our going in position is that we would require that if it's a partisan race in the general and it uses parties, whoever party is entering candidates into those races have to use ranked choice in their primary as well, right? Not just for the general. But there are other states, other places that are using a slightly different approach of opening primaries in partisan primaries. So there's no longer a partisan primary. There's just one big primary where like the top 5 vote getters go to the ranked choice general. But we have to look a lot more at that. There's a lot less data about that. You know, I think Alaska is the first state that's done that approach. So we really need to assess that more before we decide what we're going to propose constitutionally in 2026.
I
It's
know
a great
Jan
question.
has.
Great question about primaries. I mean,
Yeah.
Jan, did you have a?
Well, I just wanted you to clarify.
Sure.
So, and I think you skipped over it because you thought we all understood it and maybe I just don't. But so, okay, we have candidate A who does not get the majority. So explain the second choice voting, then we eliminate one column, right? Or one candidate.
Yep.
Is that how? And then the second choice vote from that eliminated candidate goes to the second choice of the
Right.
voters.
Okay.
Right?
So
And the third, I mean, I guess.
no problem. No problem.
Okay.
Let me quickly do it. I think I can do this pretty quickly. But let's just use the very first ranked choice that was used in the state of Maine, statewide. There were 4 candidates, Democrat, Republican, couple independents, right? So here's how that went down. In the first round, nobody had 50%. You guys can see my screen, correct?
No, you have to share your screen again.
Oh, go. I'm so sorry. Hold on.
Yeah.
Let me go back. Share screen. Here we go. Sorry about that.
There you go. Oh, perfect.
Right. So let's use Maine, right? First time they did it. It was a beautiful example of how this works, right? And a very simple way of explaining how the calculation of 50% works. Like I said, Republican, Democrat, 2 independents. Maine is a very much more independent state than other states. Every state says they have 40% independents, but that's not always, there's always a lot of leaners. Maine and Alaska are truly independent. They really don't like the parties all that much, right? So that's why they loved ranked choice probably sooner than other groups. But let's do this example. So here's who the winner would have been in plurality, right? Because Bruce got the most votes, right? But you can see the total you need to get vote-wise on the far right, right? That's what you need to get a majority. He had 134,000. He needed 144 to have a majority. So ranked choice now kicks in because it wouldn't have kicked if Bruce had 200,000 votes and had 60%, it would have been over, right? Done.
Right.
No ranked choice needed. But in this case, you do because no one has 50%, which is always the case in Maine for almost 70 years. I think the last time they only had like 2 majority winners on the first round in Maine in like 70, some crazy number like that. Like they never have a majority. So what happens is, in this case, Will at the bottom had the least amount of votes. So this describes it graphically, and kudos to Kevin Deegan-Krause for doing this. So what you do is Will is now eliminated from the contention. You pull all the ballots of the voters that voted for Will.
First.
And you look on those ballots and you say, who did they vote for second? So in other words, if Will was never in the race, right, to begin with, who would those voters have voted for if Will wasn't in the race, right? Think about it that way. That's their second choice. So you take those votes, right? They're color coded there. You distribute them and you add them to the other candidates.
Okay.
And now you look at it again.
Not quite.
We distributed Will. Does someone have 50%? Still, no one has gotten to the 50% line, right? So now you do another round of ranked choice, which says, okay, the lowest vote getter now is Tiffany, right? So the same thing happens, right? You look at who she voted for second, or who, sorry, not she, who her voters voted for second, right? And you distribute them again.
Mhm.
Huh.
Yeah.
Now you have someone who got over 50% of the vote.
It's
Okay.
always the second choice then, right?
It always goes to
Oh.
second choice. Now, there could be, let's go back to Tiffany. There could be some of these purple and red could be some will voters, right?
Mhm.
Who had Tiffany second. So just like when we went back here, right? When Tiffany got eliminated, or when Will got
Right.
eliminated,
Mhm.
he's an independent. So it makes sense that most of the independent vote, right, for second choice went to Will, or sorry, went from Will to Tiffany,
Right.
right? So it could be when Tiffany got broken up, it could be that some of those ballots are actually third choices, right? So
Right. There
the
wills.
Will voters had Tiffany second, and now Tiffany's eliminated. So if they voted for a third, their vote went to the third. That's very empowering, right? Like the person who liked Will, even though they were probably the least polling candidate, those voters' votes stayed in the process to determine who the actual winner is, right? Because that's how you get to 50%. Now, you'll notice, so I want you to really notice how this worked because it's very subtle. So if you go back here and you look at Tiffany, you see the gray bar on Tiffany on the left and the none
Right.
down below? Those are called exhausted ballots, right? So that's where, the kids are hungry. I ran to the voting booth. I didn't have time. I wanted Will, and I didn't want anybody else. I just voted for Will. I just voted for my first choice like I always do, or always did historically, right? So exhausted ballots. And what happens is, and look at the right-hand bar, look at the black bar, watch that carefully. When those get distributed and there's now more exhausted ballots, watch the black bar come to the left ever so slightly.
Mhm.
See how it came to the left ever so slightly?
Yeah, it did. Mhm.
That's how ranked choice always mathematically gets a winner, because that bar of 50% will always come down a little bit based on the number of exhausted ballots.
Yeah.
Right. So for the voters that wanted to keep their voice in the race, that's counted in the denominator to count your 50%. That's why the bar slightly comes in each time, because that ensures that someone gets 50% of the remaining vote, not 50% of the original vote.
No.
50% of the remaining vote of the qualified candidates. And that is one of the reasons why it's always passed federal scrutiny. And when the Republicans try to take it to, or any of the parties try to take it to federal judge, it always passes, because it's just like the Georgia stuff, right? I mean, it's always one vote, one candidate at any given round here. You're only counting someone's vote once. Now that vote may transfer, but at any point in time, a voter only has their vote cast towards one candidate. So that's how it passes the one vote, one voter, one vote. And that's why it's constitutional and all that stuff, both nationally and in Michigan.
I have a question.
Yep, go
Sally
ahead.
and Carol Pike.
Yes. Go ahead.
Who determines all, is this done by a computer?
Yep.
I needed to know that part. Okay, fill me in.
Yep. So fundamentally, it's no different than how it's done today, right? That Michigan uses 100% scanners, right? So just like you scan to the computer, you scan in your ballot, you scan in a ranked choice ballot, which by the way, will never always be ranked choice. You're always going to have, any ballot's going to have some offices that are using ranked choice and some that aren't, right? We're not going to implement ranked choice for every dog catcher in every community. Like it's only going to be for the important offices, or whatever office the community wants it for. So it'll always be a sort of a mixed ballot, right? Even with ranked choice. Scans it in the scanner, calculates the numbers. As instantaneously as you get the winner in plurality, right? And the summation in plurality, you get it just as instantaneously with ranked choice. It's a computer. It calculates it, from the time you pop the potato chip in your mouth and you feel like it's calculated the answer, right? Here are the differences that are important. So number one, in a ranked choice election, there's no interim result. There's no with 80% of the precincts reporting, here's who's winning, right? That goes away, because think about it, with ranked choice, you can't do this internally. You have to, all the ballots have to be scanned and sent for the computer to calculate this all at once. There is no interim. right? So that's one thing that is different. You're not going to get those interim results on election night. In fact, you won't
Okay.
get the final result probably for a day or two after. And it's differencing in states, because like for, Michigan, you pretty much have to have it in more or less by election day. New York allows absentee ballots to come in for another week.
Ooh.
So in New York, it took a long time to calculate because they're just letting stuff still come in, So, but if you have a state that more or less requires absentee and everything to come in with, in and around, right around election day, it's 2 to 3 days and your answer, right? That's number one. Number two is the level of transparency that you have to report the results. So in this case, right, you just don't say, look at this slide you see on your screen. You can't just say, here's the results, right? You have to be more transparent. You have to show, okay, and the example here is, what was it after the first round? Showing people it wasn't 50%. Okay, now Will got eliminated and got redistributed, and now here's the results of the second round. You have to physically show this to people so they know how votes got redistributed, how the person came to be the winner.
Mhm.
And then finally, then you got to show, okay, in the final round, how did Tiffany's voters get distributed? And now you know how Jared passed Bruce in the last round because, yeah, Tiffany won. And so those are the two main differences with ranked choice than today. It just takes a little bit longer to get the final results because you need everything in there to run the numbers.
Okay, part of that next question, that's very clear. I had visions of people trying to figure this out anyway. Computer, hurrah. Now, the question is, how much is this going to cost a particular district to
Great
purchase?
question.
Okay, go.
Yeah, great question. And it's important to understand, right? Like, when you implement, and especially in Michigan, even more so than other states, the way Michigan MEL, which is Michigan election law, is drafted is that you can't, or you wouldn't dare to legally do any election. I don't care if you were drawing straws out of someone's hand to determine the winner. You can't do any election without it being certified. The process has to be completely certified, right? So that means before you even do it, you have to make sure that everything is working together, that the equipment, the process, that you understand how any anomalies are going to be handled, just like you do today, right? There's so many safeguards and, the way we do elections today to make sure that fraud can't happen and all kind of stuff. All that stuff still exists, right? But with a slightly different process, you have to make sure, okay, well, for ranked choice, this part is a little bit different. How do we write a process and how do we test it and test that process? So qualification and certification is about coming up with a process that we feel is the right way to execute ranked choice, make sure we have safeguards, make sure anything can be double checked, make sure we can do recounts, and then they do a test run. Well, to do that isn't going to fall on one community, because if you certify it, it's going to be certified to be used for the state. Any community, once you certify it, any place in the state can use it. So typically, again, especially in Michigan, that certification doesn't fall on any one community. It would be the state to have to adopt and have to take on that cost to do it. And so that is an issue. I do agree with ranked choice voting. It is a big initial step. It's a lot of investment to do that certification to make sure all the scanners, right, are working the way they should across the whole state. Even if certain scanners aren't using ranked choice yet, you got to still make sure all the scanners can do it, right? And it all would work. Once it's certified, once you've spent that, it could be 300,000, 400,000, 500,000. It could be in that range of initial cost for the state. But once you do it, it's there for everybody to use, right? You can use it statewide offices. You can use it for, district elections. You can use it for county, for city. You can use it anywhere that wants to use it. You have a certified process to do so.
What about audits?
And that's one of the things that the certified process takes care of, right? So when you do the certified process, that's one of the things you're certifying. How will a recount or an audit work? And would it work in many cases, it's not really any different than today, but sometimes it could be a little bit different. And you also need to test that in the certification to make sure those audits, you do a test run of the election and you do a test run of the audit or a test run of the recount or whatever it is. All those things get done in certification so that everything is ticked and tied. And I don't think any of us want anything less than that, right? like I think in any election, none of us would want to implement ranked choice if it wasn't fully certified, right? We'd want that to be done.
Stuffy.
Mhm.
Any other
Ron, there are
questions?
some questions in the chat.
Okay, go.
Yeah, the first
Sorry, I
one
haven't
I
watched
believe-
the chat at all. Thank you for
Yeah,
helping.
yeah. The first one I believe was already asked verbally. The next question was, is there organized opposition to RCV? Who and why?
That's a good question.
You can probably anticipate my answer,
Yeah.
which is not opinion, which is fact. But I want to say this the right way because it's very dependent. We haven't seen any organized opposition here in Michigan yet, but we anticipate eventually it's going to come, right? I mean, look, it's November. We have 3 cities on the ballot. If we win all 3, we're going to get someone's attention,
Mhm.
right? Winning in Ann Arbor wasn't that much of a surprise. No offense to Ann Arbor, but you know, very progressive. But winning 3 cities in one cycle was going to get someone's attention. There has been some pushback, especially when the party didn't win a ranked choice election,
Mhm.
right? They're not going to like it. So I think that organization, you're starting to get a little more cohesive. So you're starting to hear more of it, especially in the states that are considering it. Like, so the next, right now, Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, and Minnesota are like the next 4 that are the closest to putting it to the vote or putting it to the, you know, the Congress, their legislature to vote on. So you're seeing more opposition being spent in those states. But I think one thing that counters that to a great degree is that the state that has passed and implemented more cities is Utah. Like if I quizzed you before I gave you the answer, you would say probably California
Mhm.
or New York or some
New York's what I
liberal
was thinking.
bastion of, you know, progressivism. Not the case. Utah is tired of extremism.
Yeah.
They're begging, I mean, they've already passed a lot of cities, so they're getting ramped up to potentially do it statewide because they want to get rid of the extremism. Sure, they're extremely conservative but they also have some morals and ethics.
Yeah, they
They
do.
don't want the extremists who are bound to lie, bound to be dishonest, bound to be, corrupt. They don't want that. They want conservatism, but they don't want corruption. They don't want extremism. They think it's bad for not only their own party, but their, you know, for the country. So they're one of the leaders of this. So that kind of offsets, at least up until now, has offset some of the sort of a huge hammer coming at us, so to speak, against this in opposition, because there's actually fractions of both sides that are saying this is better. They're starting to get it.
Mhm.
And it's not just helping one side or helping the other or helping just women or helping just all it does is make sure that the majority feel the community is most likely to be represented, whether it's a mayor or a governor or state rep or whatever. They just want the majority of the voters to make sure that they're most likely to get someone that represents their community the best. That's it. Any other questions? Sorry, thanks for reading these.
Yeah, there's 2 more. The next one is, has RCV been implemented anywhere that is considered heavily gerrymandered? And if so, what were the outcomes?
Yeah, I hope I'm answering this the right way. But I'll give you an example. And this might not be the only example. So I'll use District 13 that we just talked about as an example, right? So that was the area post independent redistricting results felt most frustrated by the results of independent redistricting, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Districts are never perfect. I mean, you know, you're always going to have some things that aren't so perfect, but that area of the state felt most like this didn't help us, right?
Mm-mm.
And I think that's an example of, look, gerrymandering had a great impact of making sure that the parties weren't manipulating districts to their advantage one way or the other, right? Like, so gerrymandering is a pillar of reform, but it's not the silver bullet. And District 13 is a perfect example. Redistricting didn't help them as much, especially since the first election. After redistricting, 9 candidates run, right? We already talked about it, right? So that's why you need to combine these things to really get the full impact of reform, right? You need more voters voting. That helps, right? You need to get rid of gerrymandering. You need to get money. All these things together get you what you need. So down there, I tell District 13 folks, like, okay, maybe independent redistricting didn't have as much impact on you, but the next step for you to have an impact is ranked choice, right? That's the next step now to make sure that these flaws in our democracy are addressed, and plurality voting is an absolute flaw. Split voting is an absolute flaw. That's why we are one of the few countries left that actually use it. So especially more complex societies that have a lot of different demographics, and they want to make sure they get better proportional representation. Ranked choice maybe isn't full proportional representation, but it's the most logical next jump that keeps this system from being manipulated and getting better results. It's just a pillar of many to the reform effort.
So I have a question about the ballots.
Sure.
I'm trying to figure out how, if you only have ranked choice voting for certain positions, but not for all of them on the ballot, it seems kind of difficult and messy and hard to deal with. Would you have
when you say, are you asking that more
for, would you have one ballot for the ranked choices and one for the non? I don't know. I mean,
yep. I mean,
sort of.
Two states already use it, and 57 cities have been using it for either between 2 and 50 years. So this has all been figured out. This isn't like pie in the sky theory, right? So what happens is, and what you would do is, it's a mixed ballot. Let me ask your question from two perspectives: one from the processing, like clerk perspective, and the other from the voter perspective, right? That what you do is your ballot is just like when you used to do the SATs, right? There's little marks that are on what you're filling in with the bubbles. There's little marks that are determining something for the scanner. It's the same thing when you hit the section of the ballot that is for the ranked choice offices. There's a little denotations on the ballot that say what you're about to calculate is ranked choice, not plurality, right? Or what you're about to calculate and put into the database is ranked choice, not plurality. And then there'll be another thing that says, okay, the next couple are now plurality again, right? So there's denotations that get put in the ballot that allow the computer and the scanner to just very simply handle. And again, I want to reiterate, there's 3 major scanners. There's only 3 actually. There are 3 companies that do the scanners in Michigan. All 3 of them do ranked choice. It's literally a flip of the switch to say, are you going to scan something that is all plurality? That's one switch. Or you scan something that's a hybrid that is, part ranked choice, part not. That's a flip of the switch. Now it's not that easy. You have to test it all, make sure it's working the way the computer company said it would, the way the scanner company says. So you have to test it all just to make sure it's working the way they said. But this is not rocket science. I mean, this is like something that's been around now for a while. It's all been figured out, or at least, majority worked out technically. So this is not like a technical issue anymore. So.
Very good.
There was one last question in the chat.
Yep.
And that was, are there any disadvantages to RCV?
Well, we did talk about some of them. Cost, right? I mean, you can't get around it is an initial cost, usually one time or maybe 2 cycles, for both cost of certifying, right? So just the technical execution of it, make sure it's certified, make sure it's sound, make sure you handle all your exceptions. And then there's also the cost of education. So New York had great results, but New York spent a lot of money to ensure that no one was uncomfortable, or at least was, the least comfortable they could be on election day, right? That takes a lot of education, not just in money and materials, but also in volunteers' time, right? To make sure that they're executing those educational sessions and answering questions. And if they can't answer them, getting the answers, right? There's a lot of cost to that initially. And sometimes it's, in some cities, it's not just a one-time thing. Sometimes they need to make sure they do it the next cycle too, right? Because sometimes it takes a couple, because there's new voters next cycle that weren't this cycle, or voters that didn't vote last cycle but are voting now, right? So there is a cost to that, right? So cost is definitely one of it. There is, and this is a good thing, but also takes more time and money as well, which is it's hard enough for voters sometimes to know to know enough about the candidates to pick one that they want, right? It's a little more effort. And again, it's not for everything on the ballot, but for the 2 or 3 offices that are on the ballot that are ranked choice, it's a little more effort for the voter to say, okay, well, who am I going to vote for, second or third? That takes a little more effort for a pretty decent percentage of the voters that want to rank. Like, I got to spend a little more time. And if this candidate were, my favorite candidate wouldn't have been on the ballot, who would I have voted for? And if that wasn't on the ballot also, who would I have voted for, right? Like, that takes a little more education. And that you'll see in a lot of the communities that implemented ranked choice, they also combine that with how can we get more information organized out to the voters on what these candidates stand for? Like, how do we make it more transparent? How do we make it easier for voters to find out who these people are and what they stand for? So, but again, all of us would probably agree, okay, that might cost a little more. But again, once you put that system in of how to educate voters better, it's a one-time cost. And that's a huge benefit for democracy. Like, God, we're going to show our voters, we're going to teach our voters more about what these folks stand for. I mean, I think all of us would agree we should be doing that. We should have been doing that more the last 5 decades, right? Like, it's hard to find information. So it's kind of a downside, but it's also kind of, if we do it, it's kind of an upside, because then you're going to have a community that's much more educated every cycle on who's running. And that is only a good thing.
I just wanted I noticed a question earlier on the chat that said, how many votes does each voter get? And then another part of that would be, what do you do if there are only 2 candidates running?
Yeah. I mean, in a ranked choice election, if there's only 2, it would never kick in, right? Because someone in a 2-person race for,
One of them's gonna get 50%.
one of them's going to get 50, right? So you don't, if it's 2-person, you don't need ranked choice, even though it's still going to look like ranked choice on the ballot, probably, if there's only 2. In the end, it doesn't really matter, because someone is going to get 50. And I'll reiterate the answer I gave before on the amount that you rank. So what happens is, based on the number of candidates that qualify and are on the ballot, there's a statistical model that says if it's, and I don't take me for the numbers, if it's 7 candidates, the recommendation on the ballot will be rank 4. I don't know. If it's 8, then that might pass a statistical threshold that said everyone should try to vote for 4. But that's, again, just a recommendation. It's done on math, right? Just to kind of get a robust solution or a robust outcome. But the truth is, legally, and it's just a recommendation. It could say, recommend that you rank 4, rank all of them. If you want, you can rank every single one. If you want. Or you can just pick one and not rank anything. Like, there's nothing requiring you as a voter to engage more or engage less in that ranking process. It's just a recommendation. Yeah.
Hey, Jan, do you still have your hand up?
I do. And really, I want Marsha Wadium is probably the person that should be talking, but this is more for branches. But we have a vote coming up that we feel like it's really important. We have 5 choices of possibilities, and we're going to do ranked choice voting. And how we're going to do it is, they do the ballot at the meeting, then we switch it to someone else, and then we're going to physically have them go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then see if we have a majority. If we don't, then
keep going.
Second, they move if they're in that eliminated category. But we thought it might be an interesting way also to teach about ranked choice voting. You know what I mean? For people to internalize it. So
we've done that at 2 different League of Women Voters meetings over the years, especially when we first started, where we did the exact same thing. And by the way, that's how Iowa does their caucuses, right? They're little, right? You always see them when Iowa does their primary, and like they're in a town and they're all in the gym,
Yeah.
and the delegates are all in the in the different camps.
And they're moving back and forth.
Right. And then they say they count and they say, okay, no one has 50%. Someone, and that's exactly, it really is a manual rank choice, right? Like in real time in the gym. And they say, okay, now we've seen this all around. This is the candidate across Iowa that's eliminated. So in every gym, every, town, whatever meeting place it is, they say, okay, they announce and they say, okay, people who are in the whatever camp in the gym for this candidate, they've been eliminated, right? They're the least vote getter. Now you get, an hour at all the other candidates, all the other representatives for the candidates come over and start talking to them and say, you should come to us. You should come, So, and then they get distributed and then they all decide, okay, I can't vote for my guy.
But in
Go ahead.
but in
Go ahead.
but in this case, they've already voted. So it's like your main example where we know what their second choices are.
Right. So the
they
main
move,
did
right.
ranked choice, which is automated, right? Because you just voted once. All I was saying is in Iowa, it's a manual version of that, right? So they're
Right.
they're distributing and then they keep going until somebody has 50%, and then that's the state winner for the primary. And we're desperately trying to get Georgia, like right now across the nationally, they're trying to get Georgia and Iowa are the two they're trying to desperately get to just pick up ranked choice, because it avoids all this and think about, and it actually happened in the last primary. Iowa made some calculation errors in that, right? Because now they have to, when people redistribute in the gym, now each place has to count manually, sent that number in, the number has to be manually aggregated, right? And there's so many points of error in doing that over like a whatever 16-hour period or whatever it runs for, right? And they had a lot of errors the last time where they made an error on the previous round and they had to go recalculate it and change. I mean, it's crazy. It's archaic.
And it limits the number of people who can participate. Lots of
Exactly.
people can't participate.
Absolutely. It's only the delegates who are actually voting.
Right.
Well, we think we can handle it with a maximum. There's a maximum possible 27 votes, so we think we can handle
Right.
it.
Yeah. No, you'll be fine. You'll be, and it's a great example of it. So go for it, right? And I think the results and the process will be very enlightening. It'll be very interesting just to see, because you're almost watching it happen visually. That's otherwise happening in the computer. You're sort of watching it happening in real time. It's pretty cool. Yeah.
It is.
There's
Any
one
other?
last question in the chat. It was a late breaking question. Have you spoken with Michigan clerks and heard from them?
We have. I'll give you, and I, by the way, I have a great sympathy and great respect for the clerks in Michigan.
They're pretty beaten up.
They're beaten up from the whole, lies about fraud and corruption, and they feel like they're pointing fingers at clerks for somehow doing
They're
something.
heroes.
And you can't find any more people that are more dedicated towards getting a right answer, regardless of their own bias. I mean, but with the clerks, right? It's mixed. So we have some clerks that are just huge proponents, like reached out to us before we ever contacted them, right? Clerks that really love this concept and think that it'd be better, but they all realize if we actually did it, it'd be more work for them. Like they realize there's risk. Like anytime you make a change, you execute this new certified process, there's a chance of something going wrong. And if there's one thing about clerks that define clerks, they want stability.
You don't
They don't want
want
anything going wrong. They don't want anyone pointing at them
Thank
after
goodness.
election saying you SOB, right? They want to know that they're going to calculate something. They're confident the results are highly accurate, and they don't want anyone questioning, because that's that feels like that makes them feel like they didn't do their job right if somehow they goofed up or they whatever. And when you do ranked choice or any change for the first time, it introduces change introduces errors, right? So that's their biggest concern. But generally in the counties that we're at, Larry Kassenbaum, who's the county clerk in Washtenaw, I don't think we had many discussions with him doing in Ann Arbor, and on public forums he joined. I don't think Larry is probably the biggest proponent of ranked choice, him personally, but he said it in every meeting that we got together with, like, look, I'm the clerk. I serve my constituents. If my constituents want to elect and this is where I get the draw straws example from. He said, if my constituents want to use ranked choice to pick their leaders, or they want to draw straws, or however it is, he always said, I'll do it, because that's my job. My job is to do the best that I can to implement the process the way our citizens want their leaders elected. So it really isn't about his preference. It's about just doing what the Michigan Constitution gives to cities, which is at least now, hopefully to the state, if we can pass it, gives them the constitutional right to elect their leaders however they want. And his job is to execute their will. I think that's how most clerks feel, is what I'm kind of saying is, I think most clerks feel that way, but some are a little more conservative than others in what that means, what that change means to their potential life, the first couple cycles they do it, right? So that's the summary.
Yeah.
Sally, are you making concluding remarks?
Well, I'm so thankful that for all this information. I knew a little bit about it when I started, and we had an awful lot of interest. And I know some people, they said, well, we can't make it. I said, we will record it. You can watch it. And now you're going to send me more information that we can forward out. And if some of you on the thing are not in my email list, my email is sallyaauw@gmail.com. So if you let me know if you want whatever it is that Ron's going to send, I can forward those things to you. And I wanted to thank Karen, and who's on her way to her baseball or whatever kind of game it is today, and for arranging for this. And Ron, we hope that we will connect with you again on our public policy things now that we know who you are and what you're doing. Maybe we can work out something so that we can help you.
That would be fantastic. There's so many things I could ask for, from money to joining our newsletter to all kinds of things. But the only thing I'll say before we part is Royal Oak is probably of the 3 cities where we're least connected to influencers and to community leaders than the other 3. So anything that we could do to get your volunteer help, even if it's not getting out of the house, even if it's just saying, hey, Ron, here are, 3 important either people or organizations to give this kind of presentation to, just clue me into the right people.
Okay.
I mean, I know a handful, obviously, I know some of the big ones, but like anywhere that you can point me to get turnout like this, to get in front of people who care this much. I mean, that's what I need help with the most right now, is just point me in the right direction. If you like what you heard, help me, get the word out.
All right. And we also, since this is recorded, it'll go on our AAUW Michigan website. And so people from all over the state can see it. And we just have to let them know it's there.
Ron, can I ask a question?
Who is that?
You want while we're recording or after we're recording?
I think this is all right. I just
Okay.
want, this is probably obvious, but in the 13th district, in which I was very interested, do you think that Shri Thanadar, speaking of money, would have won were there ranked choice voting?
Ooh. Well, let me ask, my personal, opinion, I'm not even sure I have enough information that I can give a strong personal opinion, but what I will say about ranked choice in general is, if in the first round, the person leading had 47 or 48%, probably still a good chance that they're still going to probably win the ranked choice. They're so close already, right?
Mm-hmm.
Someone wins with 9 candidates. The leader has 28%. Again, they're leading, so that's an advantage, right? I mean, they're already going into the ranked choice. They're already ahead. So, you would think gives them an advantage. But what would you really have? So first of all, less chance that they would have won because they're much further from 50. And I think the assessment to really answer that question is you have to go in and really understand some of the key demographics of the people that voted for the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, or even maybe even more so the 9th, 8th, 7th, 6th, because they get eliminated first, right? So
Right.
I don't know enough about the politics and the voters in those communities to know,
Right.
aside from because what I can tell you, and that, for instance, I feel pretty confident that in the 2016 GOP primary, that I kind of lean conservative. I've been an independent conservative now for a long time. I am pretty sure that the people that voted for Kasich and Cruz and Bush and what's the other big one I'm forgetting? Anyway, right? There was probably 5 other candidates that were fairly significant in each of the
Mhm.
states.
Mhm.
I feel pretty confident in saying that most of those voters would not have picked Trump second or even third.
Right.
Right? That there was a true majority split there, where the majority of the Republican Party at that time, I'm stipulating at that time, were probably much more moderate, and at the time wouldn't have felt that
Comfortable.
Trump represented them. And in a ranked choice election, I feel pretty confident the majority of those states, those first 20 states, he wouldn't have been the ranked choice winner. I can't tell you how much or how many, but that's one that I have a better feel for back then, that would not have been the winner. It would have been different.
Thank you.
You're
Yes.
welcome.
Okay.
Someone mentioned money, and I know Sri Thanadar spent a great deal of it.
Yes, he did.
Yep. He was well funded at that. I'm sure that had some impact. But yeah. Thank you, everyone. Again,
Okay, well, thank you, and
Thank
thank all of
you.
you who came.
point me in the right direction, and I'll keep at it.
Okay, we will try and maybe come along with you. Okay.
All right, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.